I wanted to talk today about heat pumps and how they're
Okay.
so often confused with like a standard air conditioner. So I was wondering if you could kind of
hmm
explain to our viewer what,
Sure.
what the
Yeah.
difference is and how it functions differently than an air conditioner and benefits, negatives,
Yeah. Well,
things like that.
that question comes up a lot. We've even had homeowners. We've informed them that they have a heat pump. They weren't even aware that they had a heat pump,
Mm.
or the heat pump would be doing things that is that normal or not normal, or what is it? What's going on here? And basically, it's always helpful to understand what does an air conditioner do, because we're gonna apply that to a heat pump. But an air conditioner, when you look at technically how an air conditioner runs, is you've got down in the basement you've got a furnace, but we're just going to call it a blower. We've got a means of moving air. We pull air out of the house, and we have a coil downstairs on top of that furnace. And outside you've got this, what we'll call an air conditioner looking thing, this cabinet outside. And inside that cabinet is a coil and a compressor. We'll think of it as like a pump, and a fan on top of it. And what happens when your thermostat in the summertime, now we're talking about air conditioning, when your thermostat says, hey, it's getting a little warm in here, it sends two signals out. It sends one downstairs to the basement, and it turns on the blower. So the blower is now comes on, and it starts pulling all the air out of the house via those return air grills. You kind of see them usually high on the wall toward an interior wall. It starts pulling in all the air out of the house, and it takes it down to the furnace, and it then accelerates it and pushes it through that coil that's downstairs, okay, that's sitting on top of the coil. Well, that coil is hooked up to the coil outside via these refrigerant lines, these two copper lines that go outside. And that the second signal that we get is it sends a signal out to the unit outside in the yard. We'll call it the air conditioner, but the outdoor unit. And it turns on the compressor, which think of as like a pump. And it starts pumping refrigerant through the coil inside, and it circulates to the coil outside and back again. It's just got this loop of refrigerant going from inside the house to outside the house. Okay.
I
Yeah.
have a question. Is the movement of the refrigerant what makes it cold?
Yes, it
Okay.
helps. So what we're doing is when all that gets turned on, we are gathering all the air up in the house, and we're blowing it through that coil. And what we're doing is we're actually absorbing the heat out of the house into the refrigerant. And it's being circulated then outside to the coil, where we're circulating it through that coil, and we're releasing that heat outside in the yard.
Mm-hmm.
So on the inside portion of it, we're taking the warm, moist air out of the house. We're blowing it through that coil and chilling it, making it cooler. So now we're blowing cool air inside the house. We take the heat outside via the refrigerant, and we blow it through air over it through the coil outside, and we release the heat outside. So in the summertime, you ever go outside in the yard, the air
Right.
conditioner's on, you put your hand in
It's
over
hot.
it's hot.
Yeah.
That's actually heat out of your house. So when an air conditioner is running like this, I know that's very elementary, but when it's running that way, we are taking heat out of the house and putting it outside in the yard. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So we have a cooler home, and we're not worried about it being warmer outside.
Right.
Okay, that's how an air conditioner works. A heat pump does that very same thing. As a matter of fact, it sits out in the yard. You wouldn't know the difference between an air conditioner or a heat pump. You wouldn't know the difference. They look exactly the same. But it starts up in the winter time. So think about this now. Here it is winter time. We need heat in the house. It sends those same two signals. It turns on the blower downstairs, and we start gathering all the air up and blowing it through that coil downstairs. And we start the unit up outside, so we're circulating refrigerant now, and we've got the fan going and everything. However, it's running literally backwards. That refrigerant flow is the opposite of what it is in the air conditioning mode. So now what we're doing is we're taking heat out of the air outside.
Oh, okay.
Moving it inside and releasing it inside the home. Just the opposite of what the air conditioner.
Well, how could it take if it's cold outside and it's needing?
Yeah.
How can it?
I always look for that puzzled look on people's face when I say that. You were paying attention. That's how I know you were paying attention, because wait a minute.
It's cold.
You said you're taking heat out of the air outside and then releasing it inside the home. Yes. Though it is 32 degrees outside, feels cold to us, there is still heat in the air. There's usable heat in the air. Absolute zero is way, way, way below zero. I mean, way below zero. And so there is usable heat outside.
Okay.
And so on that 30, 35 degree day, there's plenty of heat that we can absorb it out of the air outside and release it inside the home. Now, that brings us to a couple of the typical questions or complaints about a heat pump. So let's say, okay, it's a 35, 40 degree day, and we're taking heat out of the air outside, and it's working just fine. However, as it gets colder outside, so let's say overnight now it gets down to zero. As it gets colder outside, there is less heat available outside. So we're still running that same refrigeration machine, but there's less heat available outside because it's colder, which means the air inside that we're blowing inside is not as warm. Okay, so as it gets colder and colder and colder outside, at some point, the heat pump is going to be running all the time, trying to keep up with the demands of what you need inside. And so eventually it will need supplemental help. And it could be a gas furnace, it could be electric strip heat, but
because it's just too cold to adequately heat your house. Okay.
Now the thing is at 30 to 35 degrees, there is plenty of heat to heat a typical home outside at those temperatures. And believe it or not, here in Kansas City, about 80% of our winter is above 35 degrees.
Right.
We always think of that bitter cold week of New Year's or something like that. But actually, the vast majority of our winter is above 35 degrees. So they do a really nice job, of heating the house.
But you would still have to have, during those bitter cold times, you'd still have to have like a gas furnace to help you out.
And so the bitter cold times, we typically just turn the heat pump off, and we go to your secondary heat source, which is typically a gas furnace or an electric furnace, one of the two.
So then, since you have to have that anyways, why wouldn't you just have an air conditioner and a furnace?
Economics.
Okay.
The cost of heating your home. For years, here in Johnson County, Kansas City Power and Light would have a heat pump rate that was a dramatic cut in the rate we paid for electricity. So in the summer months, we all paid the same. We all paid exactly the same. However, in the winter months, you would get a drastic cut of your utility rate. And so it made it very, very economically advantageous to operate that heat pump instead of burning natural gas. And, if you think back 10 years ago, natural gas prices were unstable. They would spike up one year. We would see a 50 to 100% increase in gas prices from one year to the next. And so it made it very advantageous to use the electric source. When you're using that heat pump, you're using electricity, not natural gas.
Instead of gas.
And so you had a choice. So from one year to the next, we might use the heat pump more or less, kind of based on what the utility rates were. So now, today, here we are in 2019, Kansas City Power and Light has taken away those incentives as far as electric rates. So, for instance, at my house, I have a heat pump sitting out in the yard, but I do not use it. I also have a high efficiency gas furnace, and with the price of natural gas and the efficiency of my appliances, I'm better off just using natural gas to heat my home instead of the electricity, because without that break in the electrical rate, it'll still heat my home. I can still heat my home with electricity, but there is no economic advantage to doing that. So I just rely on the natural
And if
gas.
you heat with the natural gas with your furnace, it's just a warmer air,
Right.
and maybe it's a little bit.
Right.
Is it
And
more comfortable?
so
It might be.
Typically, most people will tend to like the gas heat more because it is a warmer temperature, and especially as it gets colder. That was always kind of as it gets colder, the air coming out of my registers is more tepid, and so sometimes I felt a little drafty or a little cool breeze or something like that. So. But
I thought that when I was at a call taker training and talking to people from all over the country who answered the phones, I met some people from like Alabama, and they said that they only have heat pumps.
Right. Yeah.
So, because if they don't get nasty winters and they just maybe have some 40-degree weather, then that would be a big savings, wouldn't it? To just not even have to have a furnace.
Typically, more rural areas. I'm not saying Alabama is all rural, but
where they were from, it was. I do.
Yeah, but it depends on who you're talking to.
Right.
That's why you go out in the country, you see propane tanks. Well, because they don't have natural gas piped to their home. So you get out and it really just depends on the locale of what utilities do they have available to them. And so if your choices are between electricity or natural gas or propane, there's a pecking order as far as which is most economical, to each home. And so know that if I'm total electric, so there are some folks that don't have any gas at their house, that it's all electric. That heat pump, you can just round numbers, you can always think of it. It's always going to be twice as efficient as that electric furnace downstairs. You'll have an electric furnace, and yes, when it's operating, you'll feel a warmer temperature at the register and things like that. But just know that heat pump, when it's running, it's twice as efficient. It will deliver twice as much heat per dollar as the electric furnace will. And so it just depends on what your options are. So yes, you'll talk to some people in certain parts of the country, and they have nothing but propane, or they'll have fuel oil or whatever. So yeah.
Right. So how would somebody not know that they have a heat pump? Like, how do you tell that you have a heat pump versus just a regular air conditioner?
Well, it would vary. Well, typically the dead giveaway is on your thermostat. You've got a few more switches on your thermostat.
Okay.
And so if you have just an air conditioner, you've got a heat, cool, off position for your system switch, and you might have a blower switch, which is either says automatic or on. A heat pump has a few more lights and a few more switches on it, and you'll see a term like emergency heat on the thermostat. And you'll have a heat, cool, off, just like an air conditioner, but then you'll have emergency heat. And emergency heat is a setting that you can manually turn off the heat pump and turn on the gas furnace or whatever your supplemental heat is. So, for instance, if something malfunctioned, a very common thing is, your heat pump might have ice formations on the outside of it, if it weren't working properly. Or, let's say I'm hearing a terrible noise from the outdoor unit. Something has broken or something isn't working right. I can manually go to the emergency heat setting, turn off the unit outside, and still have a source for heat in the house.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go without heat.
Right.
Yeah, and what's with the I do hear that a lot when somebody has a heat pump, that there's like a really loud shaking that they hear. So they think that there's a problem, but what I've heard from you guys before, that it might just be de-icing.
Yeah, there's the heat pump will go, depending on the weather, will go through a defrost mode. And so you've got the unit outside, and it's taking heat out of the air outside. Okay, so think of this, 35-degree day. I'm taking heat out of the air outside, so the air that I'm feeling discharged off the unit outside is going to be colder than the ambient temperature outside. So depending on the weather conditions, there will be times where I will actually have frost form on the unit outside when it's working normally, but just based on the weather conditions and the temperatures that it's operating at, I can have frost form on the unit outside. Well, my unit, every 90 minutes or so, it's going to ask itself, hey, self, do I have frost on me? It's got little sensors. It knows if it's or not. And if it does, it's going to go through a defrost cycle. And so what it is that sound you're referring to, you're going to hear it, and it's kind of a whoosh kind of sound. And when you hear that, what it's doing is it's literally reversing back and running like an air conditioner. Okay. It's doing the opposite. So now it's using the hot gas of the refrigerant to defrost the unit outside. So the fan outside will turn off, and we're now running hot gas through the coil outside. And it'll take a couple of minutes, but it's really exciting if you're fortunate enough to see this, because as it melts that frost off, it turns to steam. And so it literally looks like, oh my gosh, there's something burning.
Well, yes, that's what I get calls from people terrified, thinking that there's something blowing up outside.
Oh my gosh, there's something terrible. I've lived here for 10 years and I've never seen this before. You know, and a lot of times that's really true. They've never heard. They've maybe heard it, but they've never actually seen what's going on.
Maybe, Dad, we should start a thing where you take a lawn chair out to watch your heat pump with your cup of coffee in the morning and see what it does. Puts on a little show.
Put on your woolly socks and go out and sit and watch, you know. But I have to say this: I there's a roundabout I go through going over to the rec center, and there's an apartment complex there, and I've looked at this heat pump for a couple of weeks now. Has been totally frosted up. You know, it's the only one frosted up, and I've had a little bit of a guilt that I should go knock on their door and say,
"That's not good."
You know, so, but not my job.
If anything, could you just call anybody, because it's driving me crazy.
Yeah. Can you do something about this? It really bothers.
Doesn't have to be me. Just please.
Yeah, exactly.
Leave them a little note. I think you have a problem.
But after it does that, after it goes through the defrost, you'll hear that oosh sound again, because it's going back into the heat mode, and it turns on the fans, and away it goes back in heat mode again.
Okay, so it's not actually having a problem, it's doing its thing.
It's not, yes.
If somebody hears that and they think that it's having a problem, how long will it take for it to get back to normal?
Couple of minutes. You know, it'll go through that defrost cycle for a couple of minutes. You know, so, yeah.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Anything else about heat pumps? Are you,
there was one other noise that can be I'll say kind of a common thing, is sometimes you'll get a rattling noise outside, and typically, you know, you got that appliance out in the yard running, and the weather conditions, when we have an ice storm, so think of the ice storm, you know, when all the trees get coated with ice and the sidewalks get coated, well, guess what? That heat pump gets coated as well. And sometimes that ice can form where it will actually get hit by a fan blade, or maybe even make that fan blade be out of balance because it's got ice formations on it. So ice storms is another, can be a problematic time for a heat pump. So just kind of be aware of that. If it is an ice storm, sometimes it doesn't hurt to just go ahead and turn it off if you want to, you know, but
just run the furnace until that's kind of blown through.
Until that passes by, because, you know, that sheet of ice is on everything outside, including the appliance you're trying to heat your house with.
Right.
You know, so you might
it's having a rough day. Let's be nice to it.
That's right. That's right. So.
Okay. Very good. Thank you very much.
Very good. It's fun talking to you.
All right. See you next week.